opportunity for real change in this country.
Thank God there's finally a party that will put their money where their mouth is.
Thank heavens there's a party that will listen to the people and get this country firing on all cylinders.
We have a vital role now. This is a truly seismic moment in history. The big question, of course, is, can we trust Boris? We must not let him sell this country down the river by reheating, rehashing, and repackaging the worst deal in history, that dreadful withdrawal treaty.
Please welcome to the stage, Richard Tice.
Hello, Newport! Hey! What a crowd, what a noise. It's fantastic to be back here in Newport. It's incredible. We were here in April. Anyone here in April with us? What a party that was. What a time. I think it was a Monday night. It felt like a Friday or a Saturday night. It's incredible, isn't it? We've only been going 23 weeks. Feels a bit longer, I must be honest. Because we stood on a simple slogan, didn't we? Change politics for good. And hopefully you'll agree, we've made a pretty good start. And this is the 7th of our September regional conference tour around the whole country. And it's what we call our We Are Ready tour. Because we've got to be ready for literally anything that these clowns in Westminster throw at us. So 3 weeks ago, and we'll come back to those clowns, 3 weeks ago, just over 3 weeks ago, we launched over 500 approved prospective parliamentary candidates that are launched in Westminster. People who have been vetted, nominated for candidates across the whole country as we get ready for the inevitable general election that's coming at some point, but heaven knows when. And it's fantastic that within here in Wales, we've got so many prospective candidates here with us today. They're on the front row. Please can they stand up and give them a huge round of applause. And Nigel and I are truly grateful and humbled by the quality of candidates, both here in Wales and across the whole country, who are prepared to put their head above the parapet. Most of them have never previously stood for public office, and there's a reason for that. They're real people who've been out doing real jobs, going through real lives, real life experience, being successful, entrepreneurial, doing, achieving. And now they feel that actually they've got to give something back. And it takes some courage to put your head above the parapet, because with it comes a whole load of grief, abuse, social media, vitriol, you name it, we get it. We seem to get more of it in the Brexit Party, but I think we're the bravest. And that's because we're on the right side, because we're on the side of democracy. And when we launched 23 weeks ago in a family-run factory in Coventry, we had just 6 MEP candidates that we announced. 6 weeks later, we'd won the European elections. We'd got more votes than the Conservatives and the Labour Party put together. We were pleased with that. And now, and I love this bit, we're now the biggest party in the European Parliament. It's hysterical. And we were there in Strasbourg this week, and my goodness me, the waste, the abuse, it is a complete fig leaf of democracy. And of course, we've been hired for a job that we want to be fired from as soon as possible. Unusual that, isn't it? Most people want a job for a bit longer than a few months. But sadly, we've no idea how much longer we're going to be there. So we won the European election, and we won it convincingly. 50% more votes than any other party. And the good news is, the first thing that changed in terms of changing politics for good is that we got rid of the worst Prime Minister this country's ever had the misfortune to see. And with her gone, we also got rid of the least talented cabinet that's ever tried to run this country. So that's another lot gone. So that was a good start. But of course, there is so much more to do. And at the end of June, we had our big vision rally. 5,000 people in Birmingham. The biggest political rally for over 25 years in this country. And we announced our first domestic policies. And it's interesting how the Conservatives have literally copied almost every single policy that we announced. That's fine, you know, imitation is a form of flattery, we're comfortable with that. So we said we would scrap the daft HS2 plan, which would save 100 billion quid. And sure enough, just a few weeks ago, the Tories said they were going to have a review of this project with a view potentially to scrapping it. We said we're not going to send 39 billion quid of our money, taxpayers' cash, hard-earned cash. We're not going to send that to Brussels. They don't need it. We want it here in this country, in our regions. And now the Tories have finally woke up that actually maybe we don't need to send all that money to Brussels. We said we're not going to spend a huge amount of money on the foreign aid budget. We would redirect 50% of it, those wasted, bloated billions that are sent overseas, we'd spend that back in the UK. You add those three things up, ladies and gentlemen, that's £200 billion that we want to invest in the regions, in local road and rail schemes. We talked about investing in broadband across the country, in digital infrastructure, free Wi-Fi across all public transport, as opposed to just on the London Tube. And all of these things, of course, the Tories have started to copy. That's fine. That's fine. We talked about an online sales tax so we could protect the high street. And again, the Tories woke up and they're now sort of talking about the same thing. And that's fine. And then, of course, there was the Tory leadership election. And we've ended up with Boris. Well, he's a lot more interesting and fun than the previous incumbent, let's be honest. But the question is, ladies and gentlemen, do we trust Boris? No! Let's just make sure we're clear about that. No! That's the issue, isn't it? We don't trust Boris to do the right thing, to take us out on a clean break Brexit. Now, we'll hear a bit more about that later. And just in terms of these great candidates that we've got as we get ready for a general election, whenever it is, we've got a video here just that shows the life stories of some of the other candidates, apart from those here. So hopefully we can see that on the screen.
In just a few months, the Brexit Party has some amazing achievements. We've reset the political agenda, got rid of a hopeless Prime Minister, and made the option of a clean break Brexit the most popular one in the country. But now we face our biggest challenge, to fight a general election across the entire United Kingdom. And we are ready.
54% of people of Leicester East feel like they don't have a voice. So I'm here to give them that voice. There's a lot of people that I've spoken to that said they're never going to vote again, because how can you trust the political system now? People just want common sense, people like them representing them, and that's where the Brexit Party is firmly positioning itself. It's just a party of regular people like myself who want to get involved because we care, and then make sure that this sort of betrayal can ever happen again.
People voted for something completely new, voted to go out into the unknown and try something completely different and reclaim power back. We all have a stake in it, and I'm one of those people.
Even though I'm an ordinary person on Exmoor, running the Exmoor Pony Project, living an ordinary life, I just felt that I had to be part of it. We've stepped up because we simply have to defend and safeguard our democracy, and we're here.
From what I've seen, a lot of the Brexit PPCs now are just from normal backgrounds, just working class people who care about people as well.
I think there's a lot of commonality between a politician and a doctor. Consultation always begins with listening. You listen to what the person has to say, take on board, and then help them and make them realise that actually they've got control. They've got the power to decide their future and what to do and what not to do, and they're not helpless.
I'm just a normal, hard-working, working class person, but I think the taxi driving has given me an insight of how people live, and you get to learn their issues because you become their agony aunt. To tell the taxi driver everything.
I am ready.
I'm ready.
I am ready.
I'm definitely ready.
I'm ready.
We have an extraordinary cross-section of people from every walk of life making a stand for democracy. They will be our candidates at the forthcoming general election, and we are ready.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you definitely ready? Thank heavens, because we are going to need all your effort, all your support. You saw there some of the great candidates, people from all walks of life who've done things, who've achieved things. And we've got some great speakers to follow now, all of whom are also going to be prospective parliamentary candidates. Again, real people. And the first one is an extraordinary person. She's had a number of different sort of phases to her career, her extended career. Her first phase was sort of a warm-up. She was a member of parliament for another party. The wrong one, but anyway. She was a member of parliament in her first phase of her career, and then she realised that actually she needed to help us learn how to dance, so she became a TV star. The third and most important phase of her career is now with the Brexit Party, protecting and standing up for the most important thing, democracy. Please give a massive, massive welcome for the Member of European Parliament for the South West and a prospective parliamentary candidate, Anne Widdecombe.
We are in a complete mess. We've got the worst Prime Minister since Anthony Eden. We've got the worst leader of the opposition in the entire history of the Labour Party, and we've got the worst Parliament since Oliver Cromwell. And with that combination, we are actually engaged in the most important international negotiations for 50 years. No, let me finish this sentence, Adam, then over to you. There's a growing disengagement between the people and Parliament. And what I want is an overwhelming Brexit victory on May the 23rd. That's what I want.
Please welcome to the stage, Anne Widdecombe.
Has there ever been, ever, since the Civil War, such a useless parliament as the one we've got at the moment? You've got a parliament which is absolutely determined to overturn the will of the people. And you've got a parliament which is equally determined to frustrate the efforts of government to implement that will. And you've got a government which is completely and entirely determined to get rid of the worst speaker that we've seen in several hundred years. Parliament versus people, Parliament versus government, government versus the Speaker. Was there ever such a shambles in what is supposed to be a mature democracy? Well, the answer is very simple. If this is all they can do, we will take their places and show them what it is they should be doing. And that is why we've got enough prospective candidates to contest, if necessary, every single seat at Westminster. That is what we are ready for. And that is what we are now about. It is to make sure that the decision, which was taken by the largest popular vote ever 3 years ago, is finally implemented. But the nation voted to leave. It didn't vote to stand there with one leg in and one leg out of Europe, which is what will happen if we have the agreement number 4. The May Agreement 4. You remember the first 3? The first was presented, it was refused. The second was presented, but it was no different from the first, and that was refused. And then the third was presented, absolutely no different, but with an accompanying declaration, and that was refused. And now Boris is seriously thinking that we're going to be fooled if he brings back a souped-up version of the May deal. That is not leaving. That is merely moving from full imprisonment to house arrest. We didn't vote for house arrest. We didn't vote to be told by the EU what we are and are not allowed to do. That vote was for one thing. It was for freedom. It was so that we could live in an independent country, a country which can control its own borders, make its own laws, repeal those laws when it wants to, make its own trade deal, be governed by a democratically elected government of its own choosing. That was what we voted for in May 2016, and nothing less than that will constitute leaving. I'm tired of being told that we didn't vote to leave without a deal. The question was very straightforward. Do we want to leave or do we want to remain? And the nation said we wanted to leave. And ever since then, politicians have tried to water down the meaning of that word leave. We didn't even know that it was necessary to have a deal merely to allow us to leave. Of course, We wanted and still want and will have an effective trade deal. Of course we want and still want and will have good relationships with Europe. They will forever be our neighbours. We want to be part of Europe, but not part of the EU, which was an entirely different thing. And we knew that we would have deals to cope with all of that. But we did not believe for one moment when we voted with our crosses to leave that having a deal meant seeking their permission to leave. We are just going to go. And I'm also getting tired of being told how no deal is going to be a disaster. We are being told this by the same people who told us that if we so much as dared to vote leave, there would be an immediate recession. There would be a complete collapse in the jobs market. There was going to be doom, gloom, and Armageddon everywhere we looked. And what has happened since then? Unemployment has reached a record low. We are doing extremely well, despite the fact that we dared to defy people who think they know better and voted to leave. So don't listen when they tell you it's all going to be a disaster. Look at the more quiet pronouncements. The governor of the Bank of England said months ago, not yesterday, months ago, that then 90% of British businesses were already fully prepared. The head of the port of Calais, and the French aren't known for giving us much encouragement, says it is a nonsense to suppose that there will be chaos in his port or our ports the next day. We all know that what we are being subjected to is Project Fear the Second. And I am also tired about hearing that any small, and there may be a few small bumps, that any small disruption to our comfort or to the predictability of our lives, that somehow is worth sacrificing the independence of the realm. So, Boris, as far as WA4, as it's known, is concerned, the answer from this hall and from everybody who voted leave, and now from a lot of people who voted remain as well, is very straightforward. It is no. And if you try to foist that on us, then when you finally manage to obtain a general election and you present yourself as the future Prime Minister, the answer will also be no. If, on the other hand, Boris, you have the courage somehow to manage, and I know it's difficult with the Parliament we've got, but if you have the courage to manage to leave with a clean break so that we are negotiating in future from a position of strength and independence and as an equal rather than as some sort of vassal state, if you achieve that, Boris, then we will do our level best to make sure that you are in a position to go on achieving that. And we will give you all the help we can. But that is what you must do, Boris. You must not semi-leave, not stand there half in, half out, not be tugging your forelock to the likes of Juncker. What you have to do, Boris, is something terribly simple. It's one word. It was the word on the ballot paper 3 years ago. You have to leave. And if you don't make sure that Britain leaves, we will make sure that this Parliament leaves.
Isn't she great? As always, on fantastic form, and I think we've all got the message. And I suspect that in London, Boris will also get the message. Thank you, Anne, for that fantastic speech, those rousing words. And we're going to come back to the detail of that terrible withdrawal agreement, version 4, a bit later. And it's interesting, Anne, talking about house arrest. We'll come back to that. And so to our next speaker, he's been working in business for many, many years. Before he became a politician, he's now a member of the European Parliament for the Brexit Party and also a prospective parliamentary candidate in this general election as and when it finally arrives. Please give a massive welcome, Nathan Gill.
Guess who drew the short straw to follow Anne Widdecombe? Is this on? Okay, so, Welsh Brexiteers, are we ready? Yes! Do you know what you're ready for? Yes! Because 200 and, hang on, we've got to make sure this thing's working. Thank you. Because 271,000 of our fellow Welsh men and women knew what they were voting for, did they not, when they voted for the Brexit Party in the elections to the European Union in May. They knew that we were going to be the voice for them, that we were going to be that release from the pressure valve, the thing that was going to stop the anger that you could feel palpably in the air, could you not? We, the Brexit Party, we came along and we allowed people that one most important thing of all, hope. Because we need hope. We need to know and believe that we have a future and that our votes actually can and do matter and that our votes will be heard. And that's what we're about. And that's what we're going to do. A couple of weeks ago, I met with one of the leaders of a Eurosceptic party in Brussels. And she was very downcast and negative, and she was basically saying, if you guys can't leave, none of us can. It's all over. There's no hope. There's no chance for us all. And I said to her, just imagine that you was living in Germany in 1945, and you looked around and saw every single city desolated by the bombings. And you saw that all of your men had been taken away to Russia or America or wherever to repay the reparations. I said, you would have had no hope at all. You'd have literally just wanted to get out of your country and leave. So 20 years later, Germany was the third biggest economy in the world. It's never, ever too late, and we should never, ever lose hope in ourselves, in our country, and in our abilities to succeed. And that's what Westminster wants us to do. They don't want us to believe in ourselves. They don't want us to believe that we are good enough and that we can succeed and do this. And that's why they've tried and tried and tried again with all of their nonsense about the plague of locusts and the millions of unemployed and everything else that we've heard, which have been proven to be just that, absolute nonsense. Because we do succeed, and we can, and we will. Now, one of the most important things that we have to do is actually be doers. We have to be doers of the word. We come here and we listen to Nigel and Anne and we get enthused and we absolutely think this is just wonderful and there is hope and we can move forward. But you know something? Faith without action isn't going to get you very far. We've actually got to be doers of the word. We've got to be people who get those copies of Brexit here and go and deliver them and speak to our neighbours and knock on doors and use Pericles and get trained up with it and be part of that army of men and women and children as well. My kids don't get out of this at all. They come campaigning with me all the time. We've got to be that army because look around. We're not much to look at, but we're all that we have, aren't we? We're that thin red line. Many years ago, I was brought up in an old people's home. And when I came home from school, my mother would make us go and speak to the oldies. We had to go and listen to them for about 30 minutes before we were allowed to watch TV. So we'd go down, and of course, we would hear the same stories day after day. And there was quite a few there, but we'd move around. And they would tell us all of these stories. And initially, there were people who had been in World War I, and there were people then who had been in World War II. And these people instilled in me that knowledge and that belief that our country was something worth fighting for. It was something that was worth sacrificing for. And I just thank the Lord that I'm not being asked to storm the beaches of Normandy or parachute into Arnhem. My sons hopefully will never have to do that either. But this is our battle. Remember that. When you put on your favourite walking boots and your coat and you go out there to campaign for the Brexit Party, remember that this is your battle, that you must win. It's on your shoulders as much as it's on mine and Nigel's and everybody else's. We're a team. We must work together. Find out who your PPC is and be his best right-hand man or woman. And together, we are going to change politics for good, and we're going to make sure that any politician in the future knows that if you let down the British people, that there is an army of the people who will rise and that they will make you pay at the ballot box. Thank you ever so much.
Isn't it great, ladies and gentlemen? Let me tell you, Wales, he's a fantastic MEP. Wales is very lucky to have him as an MEP. And the most important thing now in this coming general election is that we get people like Nathan elected to represent you here in Wales, in London. It's absolutely for the Brexit Party. Now, I'm sometimes a little bit rude about certain people, or groups of people, politicians in Westminster, pretty perfect policy wonks and all that. And occasionally, I'm a little bit rude about certain parts of the civil service. But there are always exceptions. And let me tell you, this next speaker is one such exception. He took a huge personal family gamble in standing for the Brexit Party in the European elections. He was a very successful person, civil servant, working in the ONS here in Wales. But he decided that he would ditch that. And when he announced that he was going to stand for the Brexit Party, not knowing if he would be elected, he had to literally immediately quit his job. He took that brave decision. He had that courage because he believed in democracy and about fighting and standing up for it. So please give a huge welcome. He's also going to be a prospective parliamentary candidate. Huge welcome to our MEP, James Wells.
Good afternoon. So the first thing I'm going to do is say 2 thank yous. The first thank you is to all of you. So the last time I was stood here giving a speech in this theatre was back in April, when we were asking you to vote for us and trust in us in the European elections. And you voted for us, and we got 2 MEPs. So first of all, I'd just like you to give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. The second person I'd like to thank, being an MEP is very, very challenging, particularly when you've got a young family. You're away a lot. It is a 24/7 job. So I'd like to say a big thank you to my wife, Claudia, who is sitting down here. Because without her help, I would not be able to do this job for you. Okay. Now, I've given a lot of these speeches now, but I am feeling a little bit nervous today. And that's because I'm going to reveal something to you that I've never shared in public. I've never even told Richard or Nigel, so I hope I've got a job tomorrow. And truth be told, I'm a little bit embarrassed about it, to be honest with you. So, well, the hell, I'm just going to say it. So, in 2015, I joined the Labour Party. No, it gets worse, So, I joined the Labour Party to vote Jeremy Corbyn in. I know. This is going to take some explaining, isn't it? Okay, so the reason I joined the Labour Party back in 2015 is because I was angry at an arrogant establishment that lies to us all the time. I was angry after the financial crash because nothing had changed. 7 years had gone on and they promised that they would change everything so that it would never happen again, and nothing happened. What we saw instead was young people unable to afford mortgages. No pay rises for years for the working classes, despite rising costs of living. And there was Jeremy Corbyn saying that he would take on the establishment. But how naive was I? It didn't take me very long to realise that Jeremy Corbyn would be a disaster if he ever got into government. And I cancelled my membership after he became Labour leader. So what changed my mind? Well, the first thing was Jeremy Corbyn himself. Jeremy Corbyn could not lead a group of boy and girl scouts at camp, never mind the country. Most of his own party detest him. And also I learnt about all the unsavoury people that Jeremy Corbyn has supported over his career. Jeremy Corbyn, truth be told, would be a disaster for the UK. I mean, can you imagine Jeremy Corbyn on the world stage with other world leaders? No, nor can I. But listen, since my short-lived flirtation with the Labour Party, I have learnt so much more. Labour's slow-motion U-turn on Brexit and its massive betrayal of everyone who voted to leave. The Labour Party betrayed 5 million of its own voters up and down the UK who voted to leave. Water. And not only have they betrayed their own voters, but their stance on Brexit is bonkers. It's incoherent. Anybody who watches Question Time would have seen Emily Thornberry explaining it. I mean, they're going to go to the EU and say, if they win a general election, they're saying they're going to go to the EU and say, can we negotiate a deal? But by the way, we're going to campaign against that deal. It's just bonkers. It is incoherent. But there's more. Since getting involved in Welsh politics, I've learned so much more about what a shambles the Labour Party is. After 20 years of after 20 years of leading the Assembly in Wales, there's loads of evidence on what a shambles Labour actually is. I mean, all of you, I'm sure, have heard about the M4 Relief Road project. Yeah. So the M4 is obviously the main artery into South Wales. It's basically really important for jobs and it's vitally important for South Wales. And yet Labour, for years, has run a project looking at options for delivering that road. And they've cancelled it twice. Once in 2009, and then earlier this year they cancelled it for a second time. But the real shocking thing is they spent £114 million. And worse than that, when they cancelled it, they haven't even got a plan B. You know, I read a couple of weeks back, they're now going to hold a public consultation to try and look for options on how to solve the problem. More money wasted. It's a disgrace. So, don't take it from me. Lee Waters, Labour's Deputy Economy and Transport Minister, hit the nail on the head when he said, and he was quoted in the BBC as saying, Labour does not know what it's doing on the economy, and it's been making it up for 20 years. That came from a Labour minister in the Welsh Assembly. You cannot make this stuff up. But I learned more. If you look at our very own Labour-run council in Caerphilly, there's more waste. So in 2012, 3 Labour council leaders awarded themselves a 20% pay rise. That's more than £20,000 per leader per year. And this was at a time when council staff had their pay frozen. Well, once this came to light, the 3 leaders were put on gardening leave. And that lasted for 5 years. Yeah. They were only taken off gardening leave earlier this year. It cost taxpayers £5 million. Seriously, look it up. And this is at a time when Labour is closing down local services. It's closing down public toilets, which hits the vulnerable in our communities, but it's also trying to close down local leisure centres. £5 million. That's on top of the £114 million for the M4 Relief Road. But that's not it. It doesn't stop there. So yesterday I read that this week the new leader of Caerphilly Council has stepped down this week. And that's because he's under investigation by the Wales Audit Office because they identified issues related to the Cardiff Capital Region City deal. What an absolute shambles Labour is. But the person I really detest in Wales is the leader of the Welsh Assembly, Mark Drakeford. The Welsh people voted to leave Mark, and yet you think you know better than them. So Mark and his staff have been out to Brussels on several occasions, meeting with EU leaders to try and work out how they can stop Brexit. How can they live with themselves, for God's sakes? The Welsh people voted by a larger majority than the people of England. Welsh Labour has betrayed Wales. So I stand before you today and make a pledge to do everything I can in my power to kick Labour out of South Wales. It is a disgrace that Wales has some of the poorest areas in Europe. And you know, Labour keeps on blaming the Tories, the big bad bogeyman. But, you know, there's no excuse. Labour has dominated Welsh politics for 100 years. It's been in power in the Welsh Assembly for 20 years, and they were in government in Westminster for 12 years. No more excuses. Wales deserves better. So I've made my pledge. I want all of you to make your pledge. So when the general election comes, you vote for the Brexit Party. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. He's been a great MEP. What a fantastic demolition job of what Labour has done here in Wales. How it's wasted your taxpayers' money. Your cash, Labour have wasted it year after year, decade after decade. And James, you can absolutely be sure, would spend taxpayers' cash far, far better. As would our next speaker, who, again, bravely stood for the Brexit Party as a candidate during the European elections. Sadly, she just missed out, but she's got the bug. She's a passionate Brexiteer, and she's now going to be standing as a prospective parliamentary candidate in the next general election. Please give a massive, massive welcome, Julie Price.
Oh my goodness. Despite the outfit, I haven't joined the Labour Party. I've never been a member of the Labour Party, and I never would become a member of the Labour Party. I just said I'm not a member of the Labour Party. I had the honour to speak at the Merthyr rally in May, and I can honestly say it was one of the proudest moments of my life. Today, I'm here as the prospective parliamentary candidate for Newport East. It is my absolute... It is my absolute privilege to stand on this stage. Newport is my home. This is my favourite venue. And just over the road opposite is the Dodger pub, which is where I met my lovely husband for the first time. We now live just about a mile up the road. In May, I told you a little bit about my upbringing, and I mentioned my mother's side of the family. Well, today, I'd like to talk about my dad's side. Our much-loved and much missed grandparents met during World War II. Their names were Fred and Kate Batten. We know them still as Grim and Grump. He was from Cardiff, and she was from the North East. He returned to Cardiff from the war alive, but not unscathed. In fact, the family made headlines like many others at the time of the Cardiff Blitz. While his father had remained in Cardiff as a serving police officer, Grump was away serving in the Air Force when their house was hit. His dad was injured and hospitalised. Beulah, his mum, died instantly, aged 40. His little sister, Patricia, died a couple of days later, aged 18. And at 19, he had to come home to deal with all of this. And he never really talked about it, ever. Every single person in this room will have stories like this to tell. Families scarred by battles for freedom and democracy, long past and more recent. Those memories must never, ever fade. I don't know how they would have voted in 2016, but what I do know is that they would expect the decision made then to be enacted. As do we still? In May, I told you that I thought politics is broken. Well, what an understatement that was. I really didn't think it could get any worse, and I suspect we have not yet reached rock bottom or peak hysteria. The behaviour of the majority of our elected representatives makes me sick, quite frankly. And they are unfit to lick my grandparents' boots. I remain in no doubt at all that we need to leave the European Union properly and cleanly and respect that 2016 vote. If we don't, I don't know what sort of country this is. If we don't, I don't know what we fought for in the many conflicts that saw the sacrifice of literally millions of lives. And I really don't know what will become of us as we lose complete faith in our democracy and are subsumed into the coming chaos of ever closer EU integration. There's a couple of things I do know. I do know we desperately need a general election to finally rid this country of these charlatans who are presiding over this rotting corpse of a democracy. And I do know that we need to start the process of democratic renewal in this country that's so desperately needed. And I know that it's time for common sense and decency to prevail once again. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I say to you all, thank you. Thank you for being here and for keeping the faith. You were right in 2016, and you still are.
Isn't she great? That's wonderful, Julie. Thank you so much for those words. Powerful, really, really impressive. We touched a little bit on this withdrawal agreement. And Anne she used the word arrest. And when you get arrested, not that I have any experience of this, I'm told they use these things called handcuffs. And it's often quite difficult to really understand exactly why this withdrawal agreement is so bad. So I thought we'd try and sort of give a little bit of a graphical image. A picture tells 1,000 words. And if we sign this terrible withdrawal agreement, we will be handcuffed to the European Union forever, for many, many years to come. We'll be trapped. If you're handcuffed, where are you taken? Well, you're taken to a prison. I love the sound effects. And what P stands for is that we would be paying 39 billion quid for nothing in return except the right for a chat. It doesn't guarantee a trade deal, no. Just the right for a chat. R. R stands for being ruled by the European Court of Justice for many, many years to come, with no say, no voice. So you can see what's happening. I stands for inside the customs union. That means we can't do trade deals. We can't do trade deals, we can't reduce tariffs, we can't reduce prices for consumers, and we're still in the single market. So you see what's happening here, ladies and gentlemen? It's starting to feel a little bit restricted. It's a bit cozy. And we haven't even finished yet. S. S stands for suffering, that we would continue to be plundered and the pillage of our fishing waters around our coastal communities that we want back. They're our waters and we want them back. So you can see what's going on. We're handcuffed and we're closed in. And then they're going to order us around. They're going to order that we accept their rules and regulations with no say, no voice, even on matters of defence. They would tell us what we've got to do with our military. They'll tell us what we've got to do with foreign policy. And Nigel will talk about the Iranian tanker saga a bit later. So you can see what's happening here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trapped. I'm locked in. So to end, ladies and gentlemen, end means that is not Brexit. We are trapped in a prison, still handcuffed to the European Union. Is that what you want? No! Are you sure you don't want that? No! Just checking you're still awake. No, we do not want that. I'm very clear what we want. We want to break free of all of that. We want to get rid of the handcuffs. We want to be a free, sovereign nation, independent, able to do what we want. Bars, let's get rid of the wretched things. We don't want bars, we don't want handcuffs, we want our freedom. Free to buy our British products when we want to. Free to protect our crucial strategic industries like steel, like defence, like our railways. These are the freedoms that we need. Free to govern our country as we see fit in a proper, fair and free democracy. And there is no one who has fought more for our freedom, for democracy and independence over the last 25 years than our next speaker. Because we all know that without Nigel, there would have been no referendum. We all know that without Nigel, there would have been no Brexit. And without Nigel, there wouldn't be the Brexit Party. And without the Brexit Party, heaven forbid, Theresa May would still be Prime Minister. Oh. But thank heavens. Before we welcome Nigel to the stage, let's just see him in action on the video.
It's extraordinary to think that back in March of this year, all seemed lost from a Brexit perspective. We had a Labour and Conservative Party, both of whom were happy not to take us out of the European Union. And I felt that something absolutely fundamental had broken. Trust in politics, trust in our entire political system, and that is why I founded the Brexit Party, to restore that faith. What we've done already is we have completely reset the political agenda in this country, so much so that a clean break Brexit on the 31st of October is now by far the most popular option in this country.
Please welcome to the stage, Nigel Farage.
Hello, Newport! Great to be back in Wales. I remember the last time I was here, the party had just been formed. We were heading into a European election, and I think by topping the polls as convincingly as we did here in Wales in these European elections, we have now put fear in the hearts of the other people in the valleys of South Wales, and I'm very pleased about that. Never before has a brand new political movement, in the space of less than 6 weeks, gone from nothing to winning. We won across the country, but we won here in Wales absolutely convincingly. And I can't really think of a part of the United Kingdom
that is now less represented than Wales. There are 40 members of Parliament that Wales sends to Westminster. 39 of them have either voted to stop us leaving on the 31st of October with a clean break Brexit, or voted for Mrs. May's dreadful new European treaty. Only one out of 40 MPs in Wales, David Jones, have stood up for what the people of Wales voted for so clearly, so decisively. 75% of Welsh councils voted to leave, and just one MP has been prepared to stand up. Just one. And that one MP who's had the guts to stand up for you is retiring at the next general election. So you might think you've got nobody to stand up for you. You might think you've got nobody to vote for. Well, with me today on the stage are the men and women who will stand for the Brexit Party at the next general election. Give them a hand. And they're going to be needed because, of course, most of these seats, particularly in the south, have been held by the Labour Party for 100 years or more. Indeed, in many ways, South Wales was the birth of the Labour Party. But it's a very, very different Labour Party today than the one that for much of that period has represented the voters in South Wales. It is now a party of Islington and not Isloin. It doesn't represent you. And the complete contempt with which they treat now the Labour Party Leave voters is astonishing. You know, the North London intelligentsia that run Labour, the Sir Keir Starmer types, the Emily Thornberrys. I know James talked about it, but it's worth running through again, isn't it, really? Did you see Emily Thornberry on Question Time the other week? Poor old Richard had to sit next to her for an hour. I mean, it must have been agony. And there she was, espousing her view as to what the Labour Party should do. Win the election, go to Brussels, renegotiate a new deal, put it to the people in a referendum, and then vote against it. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up, could you? And Corbyn himself, who this week has confirmed that the second referendum would be a choice of Remain or a new deal based on membership of a customs union and a single market. Corbyn wants to offer you the choice of Remain versus Remain. Can you think of a bigger insult? And can you imagine the way that so many of your MPs have behaved in Westminster, the shenanigans we've seen over the course of the last few weeks, aided and abetted by that ghastly little man called Bercow. But they literally have set out to subvert the democratic process. Who would have thought that in all the countries of the world, the one that was known as the Mother of Parliaments should have behaved the way that it's done? And you see them on the television, they look so smug, complacent, pleased with themselves at all they've done. And I think that disconnect between Westminster and you here in Wales has got a whole lot wider in the course of the last couple of weeks. They don't seem to understand that. So let's make this message very, very clear in Labour-dominated Wales. When the next election comes, and there will be an election, Although at the moment, the Labour Party's job has been to stop us leaving and to stop us having a general election. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Quite extraordinary. It's so awful. But there will be an election at some point, probably in November. I don't know. It could be later. But every Leave voter here in Wales needs to understand the Labour Party have turned their backs on them. The Labour Party have betrayed them, and the Labour Party are not worthy of their vote at that election. Now, we did, I think, one of the remarkable things that we did with the European elections, with the birth of a party that is now, I think, are we 25 weeks old this week? 23. Oh, gosh, I'm running ahead of myself. But one of the remarkable things we did, well, of course, one of the effects was we helped Mrs. May on her way out of Downing Street. And not before time. And I don't think Boris would have even got through to the last two, let alone won the leadership, had it not been for the power of our vote and the fear within Conservative ranks. So let's be fair to Boris. For the last few weeks, he did inject some energy and optimism into the job. I mean, it would have been quite difficult not to have done, given what had gone before. But he did do that. And it was all sounding really rather heroic, wasn't it? You know, we're going to leave on the 31st of October, do or die. We even heard further references to rather being dead in a ditch. And it all sounded very, very heroic. But I'm sorry to say that things have taken a very different turn. And we saw that this week in Strasbourg, because the 29 of us, including the two from Wales, the 29 of us were there in Strasbourg this week in the European Chamber. You might have read one or two press reports about that. We, every time any speaker got up and tried to condemn the United Kingdom, condemn the Brexit result, or suggest that we should be made to vote again, you can bet your life the Brexit Party MEPs were in full voice on your behalf. Don't worry about that. Because, I don't know about you, but we've just about had enough of our nation being talked down to and humiliated by other EU and European leaders. I mean, who did that little guy in Luxembourg think he was last week? Unbelievable. And it wouldn't have mattered whether it was Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister. This was our Prime Minister, who, when they go abroad, represents us. And to be put in front of that baying mob with that little pipsqueak of a Prime Minister. I called him a pipsqueak in the European Parliament. I thought it was really quite polite by my standards, really. But amusingly, the interpreters had great trouble putting that into Greek. They couldn't quite fathom it. So we were very united as a party, very united as a group there this week. But what we saw, it wasn't the insults and the abuse of people like Verhofstadt, who is... And by the way, we do need to recognise something, that in a civilised democracy, we can respect the fact people have different points of view and like them as human beings, all right? That's very, very important. Very, very important. However, this does not apply to Guy Verhofstadt. Who is perfectly vile at all times. But what was interesting wasn't so much the theatre on the back benches. What was interesting was what came from the front of the chamber. What was interesting was what Juncker had to say. What was interesting is what Barnier had to say. There was a very different tone to anything I've seen since the referendum. There was no knocking or mocking of Boris Johnson. No condemnation from those two of the Brexit result, just a little bit of regret. And on the backstop, which of course up until now had been this great article of faith, Juncker said, I have no emotional attachment to the backstop. Now, he said that in the morning. Well, I wouldn't want to be a hypocrite on this score now, would I? But later on that evening, he said, I have no erotic attachment to the backstop. Actually, whatever the politics, I do find Juncker rather fun, and I quite like him, really. But you can see what's happening here, can't you? You can see what's happening here. Boris Johnson, when he talked about leaving with what he calls no deal, and by the way, I don't want any of you ever, particularly you lot, ever to talk about no deal. It's not no deal. It's a clean break Brexit, all right? It's positive. It's good. And for everything we're told from Operation Yellowhammer and everything else, the other thing I saw this week in Brussels and Strasbourg that struck me was the absolute horror they have got of the idea of a clean break Brexit. Because if we break free, we are able to become, outside of their rule book, more competitive than the rest of the European Union. And there is a wall of global money out there waiting to invest in a Britain that is freed of these rules. It'll be good for jobs, it'll be good for investment, it'll be good for South Wales, it'll be good for the rest of the United Kingdom. So no more defensive language about no deal. It's a clean break and a better future. That is what we're fighting for. Thank you. So let's be clear. Let's be clear. If Boris Johnson thinks that by simply picking up Mrs. May's, oh, and by the way, they call it Mrs. May's deal. Well, she didn't write it, did she? I'll tell you who wrote it. Barnier wrote it with Mrs. Merkel looking over his shoulder. And it's not an agreement. It's not a deal. It is a new European treaty. That is what it is. Binding in international law. And for reasons you've heard already, almost impossible for us to break out of unless the other side wants to let us go free, which we know already is not what they are ever going to do. So let's make sure people understand that it is a new treaty. It would be a complete betrayal of the Brexit vote from the very beginning. From the Bloomberg speech, when Cameron announced the referendum that he would give us, he said the choice will be membership of the Union or we will leave. And he wanted to frighten us, you see. He wanted to make us think, oh dear, we best not be too naughty. Or we'll leave all together. Well, all together now. What's wrong with that? We want to leave, don't we? We want a clean break Brexit, and they told us all the way through we'd leave the single market, we'd leave the customs union. They have, as Anne brilliantly pointed out earlier, tried to change the meaning of the word leave. They think we didn't know what we voted for, but we did know what we voted for. We voted to be outside the institutions of the European Union. We voted to be self-governing. We voted to be free. We voted to overturn nearly 50 years of lies. And that's what we've had. That's what we've had. Those of you in this room who were old enough to vote back in 1975 know that we were told it was about trade. We were told it was about friendship. We were told it was about cooperation with our European neighbours. And people voted for that. And do you know something? People would vote for that today. I'd vote for that today. I want us to be friends with our European neighbours. Of course I do. But I view what has been built up through stealth in Brussels, the unaccountable power at the centre within the European Commission. I view their ambitions for an army. I view their growth of a foreign policy, their continued expansion, their absolute determination to build a new European empire and to crush and to snuff out nation-state democracy. I don't think this is just bad for us. I think it's bad for the whole of the rest of Europe too. I really do. I really genuinely do. In some ways, I guess the picture looks bleak. The Liberal Democrats are now all for simply revoking Article 50. In fact, Joe Swinson tells us it was a terrible mistake to have the referendum, despite the fact she campaigned for a referendum at the time. But no one seems to care. Plaid also now wants simply to revoke Article 50. Labour is now a second referendum Remain party, and we're on the verge, I'm afraid, despite all the promises, of being let down by the Conservatives yet again. Yet again. So it may look bleak, but actually it isn't. Despite the wall of propaganda, the nonsense of Yellowhammer, the threat that we could run out of medicines, of food. I mean, I don't know whether Juncker's got to flee the U-boats now he's going to sink all our vessels with. I just don't know. And when the president of the Port of Calais and the boss of the Port of Dover tell you they're 100% ready for Brexit in whatever form it comes, I suggest we listen to them and not the overpaid pen pushers in Whitehall who are not doing a neutral job, and once Brexit's done, we'll take the knife to them, all right? Had enough of all of it. Had enough of all of it. But however tough or bleak it may look, be reassured by this. The public aren't fools, and they're not being fooled. And the majority now who favour a clean break Brexit over an extension and a second referendum is a commanding 15 to 20 points in the lead. Our side is winning. We're getting bigger. We're getting stronger. And none of this would or could have happened if it wasn't for the birth of the Brexit Party, if it wasn't for the ability of this organisation to turn people's anger into hope. And I'm proud of the people that I've managed to gather around me in the space of these 23 weeks. I'm proud as we go touring around the country. This is one of 10 meetings that we're doing, our sort of rolling conference tour. I'm proud of all of you for turning out. I'm proud of all of those people who paid £25 online and helped us raise £3 million quickly, something that no political party online has ever done before. I'm proud of all of our collective efforts, but understand we've got bigger, harder battles to fight in the future, but with your support and your help and these people, I think the one message we can send out from Newport today is that we are ready. Thank you.
We're ready. Not only are we ready, but as you've just heard, Nigel is ready and will lead whatever battles lie ahead. Now, we've just got time for a few questions, and whilst Nigel just gets his breath back, Stan from Swansea has asked a really good question, which goes to the heart of the choices and the freedoms that we can make as a sovereign nation after we leave with a clean break Brexit. Whereas if we sign this terrible deal, we couldn't do this. Stan asks, Swansea is a deep water harbour. Could it become a free port after Brexit? Well, the simple answer to that is if we remain trapped in some form of customs union, then we couldn't have proper free ports, either in Swansea, anywhere else in Wales, or anywhere else around the country. That is the sort of freedom and the sort of choice which is why we must leave the terrible customs union or anything that looks or sounds like it. So thank you, Stan, for that important question. And then Paul asks another vital question, which in a sense has sort of clouded the way these negotiations have gone, because it revolves around the backstop. And Paul says, how can the Northern Ireland border problem be solved, and will it prevent us from ever leaving, Nigel?
Well, I mean, I have to say one thing about the backstop and about the Northern Irish border. Other than a brief comment by Major and Blair during the referendum, outside of Northern Ireland, I wasn't asked a single question on the Irish border during the referendum campaign. But Monsieur Barnier, he's the one that thought, let's find a problem. Let's design a question to which it's very difficult to provide an answer. And you've got to say, I mean, the truth of it is, he is very much better at this than Ollie Robbins was on our behalf on our side. And Barnier he's very polite, he's very charming, he's very proper, he's a real Euro fanatic, but I'm not sure he's got the best sense of humour, because I saw him in July in the coffee bar in Strasbourg, and we said hello. He's always very polite and very reasonable. And I said, I've got to tell you, Michel, I wish you were on our side in these negotiations, but I'm not sure that he got it, because he's boxed us in. He's boxed us in. Mrs. May accepted the principle of the backstop. We've been in trouble ever since. But here's the odd thing, the really odd thing. So if we leave with no deal, a clean break, Barnier has said there'll be no hard border. The Irish Taoiseach Varadkar has said there'll be no hard border. The British government have said there'll be no hard border. Now, unless Donald Trump is coming over to Ireland, although I think he's got quite a big wall to build with Mexico, so I'm not sure he's really got time. So if we leave with no deal, there's no problem. But if we sign up to the withdrawal agreement, there is a problem, which shows you what nonsense all this is. Barnier's intention from day one, and I went for a long meeting with him back in January 17. His intention all along was to keep us part of the customs union. And if you want another clue, and by the way, with technology, that border's no problem. Already across that border, you have different income tax rates, different excise duties, different corporation tax rates, a different currency. And yet everything since the Good Friday Agreement operates on the basis of a bit of live and let live and a bit of cooperation. So there's no difficulty and no problem actually with that at all. I honestly think we can move on. Boris is going to put some terms on the table, but here's the problem. The problem is, all the while they obsess and we obsess about the Irish border, and when a solution is found and Boris comes back on the 18th of October, you know, as British Prime Ministers often do when they get off aeroplanes from Europe, and he waves this piece of paper. Oh, I'll get in real trouble for that one, won't I? Never mind. But it's not about the backstop. The backstop is a diversion. The backstop removed is a diversion. Even without it, this new European treaty is the worst deal in history, and we must fight it every inch of the way.
There's so much wrong with politics that we want to change, and Gordon's question is actually really, really important. It comes down to the whole issue of political democracy and changing things for the better. And Gordon says, why isn't it automatic to have by-elections when MPs change their political parties as they no longer represent the people? And the simple answer is, of course it should be automatic. Of course it should be automatic. If you no longer represent the people that you were elected and you've gone off to another party, then you should put it back to the people.
Is Mark Reckless here? Mark, come here. Come here. Please welcome Mark Reckless, Assembly Member for the Brexit Party. Have you got a handheld? Now, unlike Chuka Amuna or Anna Soubry, who think they can change parties at will, not just once, but twice in the space of a year, here's a man who was elected as Conservative Member of Parliament for Rochester and Stroud in Kent, who became so unhappy with the direction back in 2014 that the country was going, his own party was going, that he stood down as a Conservative Member of Parliament for Rochester and Stroud, announced that he joined UKIP, which at the time I was leading, but as a matter of honour, he stood down and gave the people of that constituency a by-election, and he got re-elected doing the right and the honourable thing. And I have a huge regard for Mark Reckless's integrity for doing that, and I'm very, very proud that he's now leading the group in the Welsh Assembly for the Brexit Party. I've no doubt you'll be heading on to the next Welsh Assembly elections to a huge, storming victory. But please, Mark, the floor's yours. Perfect.
I'm always grateful to Nigel when he invites me to speak. I wish sometimes he'd just give me a little bit more warning. But I would say, when I was unhappy with David Cameron, and he published his book, I understand, this week. I haven't read it yet, but if any of you saw what he was saying about Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, you just wait to see what he says about me. But I wasn't just upset with what David Cameron was doing. I was inspired by what Nigel Farage was doing. And I guess some of you here have heard Nigel speak quite a number of times before. Some of you, it may be your first time coming. I've heard Nigel speak quite a lot now. But I have to say, Nigel, what I heard from you today, I've never been more inspired. And I sit in that Welsh Assembly, listening to people who said they would respect the referendum, that they wouldn't work against the decision of the people of Wales. Yet they lied. They are doing everything they can to try and undermine, to try and reverse, to try and revoke, to try and ignore the instructions they received from the people of Wales. And when I listen to them do that, I get very, very angry. But it's important that one controls that anger, that one directs that anger. And the phrase that has stuck with me most from listening to Nigel just now is that he created the Brexit Party. He brought us together in order to turn anger into hope. And for that, we owe Nigel an enormous debt of gratitude. Nigel, we are all behind you. We're all ready. Thank you.
So much.
Well done, Mark. Thank you, Mark. We've just got time for one more question. Michael from Caerphilly says to Nigel, if Boris gets through May's treaty, can the Brexit Party do anything about it?
You know, it'll all depend if this does get passed in the House of Commons, and don't forget, leading the charge to support it is one Stephen Kinnock. Because he thinks if he can show his voters that he voted for it, he supported Brexit. What we've got to do is make sure his voters know that it's not Brexit, it's Brexit in name only, it's a betrayal of Brexit. He needs to understand that. Look, if Boris Johnson gets this passed, in the short term, it'll depend on whether the public see it as being a good deal or a bad deal. And if they understand the implications of what that treaty is, they'll never forgive him for doing it. If he gets away with it in the short term, well, within 6 months or a year, they'll realise that once again they've been had. I know that the Prime Minister is in a difficult position. You know, Parliament have behaved shockingly. Many of his own party have behaved pretty shockingly. His own brother, for goodness sake, came out against him in public, and that, for any of us, would be a tough thing to have to live with. So I've got a certain human sympathy for what he's been going through, but he'd be better to hold his nerve. Better to hold his nerve. Better to recognise that if he went for a clean break Brexit, this dynamic new political movement wouldn't be his enemies, we'd be his friends, we'd work with him, and we'd win. We'd win the Labour seats in South Wales, and there are other seats that he could win where we'd leave him alone. Together, we'd smash it for an election. We'd get Brexit, we'd defeat Corbyn. All of those things, I think, would be worth fighting for. So, Boris, all I can say is please do not think you can dupe the British people, because you won't get away with it.
That's the point, isn't it? We won't let him get away with it, and we are ready for anything that he and Parliament throws at us. So please be on your feet so we can make a very loud noise that they can hear in London. Hold your backers up. Are we ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Yay! Thank you very much indeed. Have a very safe trip home and a good evening.